Hello, everyone. This is Pat Neary at DWS. We're just about ready to start. I'm going to hang on for a couple more minutes. We're seeing attendees still joining, so I'll give that a minute or two more. But I just wanted to touch base and let you know that we're about to start. Okay, it looks like the little rush of people joining is sort of finished, so we're going to kick off now. We've got 45 minutes in the diary with everyone. I want to thank those of you that are on the call with myself and Shaun Meyer. I want to thank you for joining us today. Hopefully we've run this at a reasonably convenient time for folks. It's sort of afternoon-ish, late in the day for folks in Europe, and then morning in earlier in the day, late morning, early morning in North America. And we've got folks from all dotted all over the globe on the call. And the purpose of the call today is to talk about stress testing, taking the stress out of stress testing. And the title on the slide I've got here talks about easily simulating load on your JDE Edwards Enterprise One system. So we're going to get into that, and we're going to introduce our solution to the problem and give you a feel for what the software looks like. The plan is for myself, Pat Neary, to do a few slides and give everyone a bit of sense as to what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we do it from a PowerPoint sort of slide perspective. And then I'm going to hand over to my colleague Shaun Meyer. Shaun's joining me today. We're actually sitting in the same room for a change. We normally don't have that happening, but we're in the same room today. And Shaun's going to show you the load test product. And the prerequisite sort of scripting product that we have, just very briefly to give everybody a sense of what we're doing. Okay, so moving right along, let's see if I can get my PowerPoint slides to run. DWS is a company that's been around in the Enterprise One space for more than 20 years now. A common thread that runs through pretty much everything we do is our development and technical service offerings. And we work with people, when they're first implementing the software, when they're, sort of in a run and maintain mode, as well as doing upgrades and, trying to stay code current. So we've got a range of product and service offerings. And today really is all about our product offering, and specifically the load test product. The products that we've written, designed, and developed over the last 5 or 6 years are all focused on helping customers test smarter and to ease the burden of testing. If you can do a better job of testing, you take considerable amount of time and effort out of each and every single project that you run. And that's something that we're very committed to, trying to help companies run better projects. So whether you're an end customer running JDE Edwards projects, or whether you're a systems integrator that is working with end customers, we'd like to think that what we have from a testing products perspective, is interesting to you and is something that you might want to consider using and taking advantage of to help you run better projects and to better serve, the customers that you have within your businesses, benefiting from JDE Edwards. So we're really all about load test today, and Load test is one of three projects, Focus, Swiftest, and LoadTest. LoadTest is the newest product that we've got. It's something that we did beta tests on during the course of last year. Is that right, Shaun? We did some beta tests during 2018, and in 2019 the product came generally available, and we've got a handful of customers probably that have done different sorts of things and different kinds of tests with the load test product. So why do people load test? And when do people load test? If we weren't on a global sort of webinar, I'd try and engage and solicit, kind of responses from the audience. But this isn't the forum for that. Load testing is pretty interesting in that, historically, folks have talked about doing big projects, and then at the end of that project, double checking and trying to satisfy themselves that they've got the infrastructure in place, and that they've configured the software, in a manner that is going to support the requirements of the business. So historically, we've seen load testing, stress, volume, performance testing sort of happening at the tail end, of a big customer project. And that's changed a lot with the introduction of the cloud, and with more and more JD Edwards customers offloading, or running JD Edwards in the cloud. They're being provided services, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, by the likes of Oracle and Amazon Web Services, or even Microsoft to run JD Edwards. So you might use load and do load testing to kind of check on the performance and the promises that have been made to you by a service provider, to make sure they can scale and that they can provide you the kind of response times that you expect. Should you find a peak in your operations, they need to respond to that peak in operations. So we can use load testing, to regularly check a service provider, and we might also use load testing at the tail end of any project that changes the configuration or implementation, because those of us that have worked in enterprise software for a long time understand and appreciate that the parameter settings and the configurations that you choose to make can really have a big impact on the way the software performs and the way the system's going to perform for your end users. I mean, we all expect and understand that Oracle does a heck of a lot of testing, and does everything they can to ensure that the software they're delivering is bug free and is fit for purpose. But we also know that each and every one of our unique and particular implementations typically identifies and finds problems, and some of those problems might be performance related and might be found by doing stress and load testing. So to summarize, you load test to mitigate risk and improve the performance of your systems. If you have your own infrastructure, you might very well be trying to stress the system to figure out where the system might break. And if you don't have your own infrastructure and you're relying on a third party to provide that infrastructure, and the third party giving you assurances, you can test those assurances. But the bottom line is that we're trying to satisfy ourselves and key stakeholders within the business that as and when we go live with the with the project, on the infrastructure, configuring the software the way it's required to be configured in order to support the business, that we're in a good place to carry on. Typically, this isn't easy to do. It can be pretty complex. It can take a lot of time, and you can incur a lot of cost. And there are lots of products out there, designed to help companies do load testing. But those products tend to be quite technical, require technical resource, programming skills. You got to go out and buy significant, licenses, to support, what might very well be fairly short-term, interim kind of testing requirements. And they're not always very easy to use. So, like we found with testing generally across the JD Edwards customer base, people do load tests, but they do load tests sort of in a manual kind of crude way. And they would like to potentially be a bit more sophisticated, but the products that are out there, their ability to actually engage and use those products, isn't sufficient. So they just sort of get by, is what we've been seeing and what we hear a lot of JD Edwards customers tell us. When we ask them and we talk to them about their testing strategies and how they go about testing and how they go about doing load testing in particular. If you don't have, a product and people within your organization that can use a load testing product, what you end up doing typically is getting a whole bunch of people in a room, asking them to enter transactions. And if you're nice, you buy them pizza, you feed them up, and you take care of them, and you hope you get a result. And we always hear about load test windows, on a weekday or load test weekends, in the run up to go live. And what we're offering with the JD Edwards load test solution is kind of a solution to this problem, something better. What we're trying to avoid are the sorts of things that are listed here. And I'm not going to go through each and every one of these points. I'm going to just leave the slide there and let you guys cast your eyes over that. All of those things sort of test people and make it a little bit difficult. So what we've done with load test is bring to market a solution that is relatively simple, straightforward, and easy to use. It's very intuitive. We'll talk about that a little bit more. What you'll see and what you'll feel is, from when Shaun shows the software, is a very simple sort of controller interface where the controller employs agents, and those agents, are basically within your environment running your JD Edwards software. You might have more than one environment. You may have more than one version of JD Edwards. That's fine. We don't care. We'll set up load tests using the controller, pointing at whatever environment you want, running tests across your network, across your web servers, database servers, whatever you want to do. And what we do when we run those tests, and where we keep information about that test is we're backing everything up and we're keeping a record of everything that gets done in what we call the Dimension hub. And it's within the hub where we've got the scripting facility, and we've got a record of the tests that have been executed and run in support of your load testing requirement. The interesting thing about load testing and what we provide as a load test is, we are doing just what it says on the tin. We're creating load as if 500 people are sitting in front of JD Edwards screens, and we can tell you about the performance of the applications as it relates to those people doing the job around you using load test to create load. You'll be monitoring and looking at all sorts of other things, whether it's a database server, your network, your web servers. There's lots of data that needs to be collected. So we're creating load and we're creating and collecting data related to your use of the performance of the JD Edwards applications themselves. What we deliver with load tests, for the business is that peace of mind, an investment check, maybe something around capacity and infrastructure. And from a project manager's perspective, we're saving time, money, and effort. We're ensuring that we're thorough, accurate, consistent, and repeatable. We talk about consistency and repeatability because with LoadTest and a tool like LoadTest, we can do the same things over and over again, and we know what we're doing is exactly the same over and over and over again. And that's something you can't do with end users, with a load test window or a load test weekend. It just doesn't happen. And, that'll allow us, because it's consistent and repeatable, it'll allow us to do benchmarking sort of activities, should you want to do that, and, make load test part of the fabric of what you do as you look after JD Edwards month to month, week to week, and what have you. And, we're collecting, as I said, lots of data and giving you, information that you can work with, from an analytic perspective, to help you identify and, action and, resolve issues. When you see the software, you need to be aware that it is built specifically for JD Edwards Enterprise One. That's the world that DWS lives in. We're solely focused on helping companies get the most out of their investment. And I always say to people, if you're spending money and investing in JD Edwards, there's probably a conversation that you might have with DWS about how we can help you get more out of the money you spend on JD Edwards. The software is very lightweight and easy to use, and you'll see that when Shaun shows the software. And it's not techy. There isn't anything in our solutions that requires coding. And that, as I say, is almost certainly different from any of the other products that we're aware of in the load testing, stress testing, volume testing space. I mean, if you look at Oracle's application test suite, OATS, or if you looked at what used to be HP and now Micro Focus's Load Runner, or UFT product, you got to be a techie in order to use that stuff. And same with, IBM Rational tools or Microsoft tools. You can't do this sort of stuff unless you're a techie and you know how to code. You can do load testing if you're JD Edwards literate, and, are comfortable working with, JD Edwards software as a business analyst, super user, or CNC. You can accurately simulate a day in the life. We can do stuff repeatedly and consistently, and we're extracting data. So with all of that, I'm going to stop. That's my 15 to 20 minutes, which I sort of promised Shaun I would do. And I promised you guys that that's what I would do. And I'm going to make Shaun the presenter and let him show you the software. So over to you, Shaun.
Thanks, Pat. So what we're looking at here is the Swiftest controller application. The solution is basically made up of two applications. One is the controller, and the controller is where you define your load test. You click the execute button, and then you also inquire on the results afterwards. And then there's also agent software. And you can load that agent software in a number of different places. You can put it on actual physical machines, VMs, depending on how you want to load test. Maybe you want to test outside your network. So you're testing, your VPNs and firewalls and things like that. And maybe you're happy that that's all fine, and then you load it on machines that are actually inside your network. Just really depends on how you want to set up this particular load. So we'll look at the controller application. On the left here, we've got a number of different load test definitions we've already set up. You've got a lot of freedom about how you might want to do this. As an example, you might want to create a load test that's got key batch submissions. You know that it's going to create a bit of a load in your system, and you can fire this off whenever you need to and create that load and check that everything's working the way it's expected to. Maybe you want to set up a load test for a user that's going to use various systems in E1. And then scale that up and make sure that there's no issues there. We've created a couple of heavy loads that are just going to give the system a good punch and make sure that it doesn't fall over. Maybe some month-end jobs, but ultimately you want to possibly, depending on what you want to test, create like an ultimate load test, which is just going to be the worst day ever for your system. It's year end, it's month end, it's all of your users entering time entry at the same time, running purchase orders, importing sales orders, doing whatever it is that's really going to stress out your system and make sure that it can handle the load that you expect. So we'll have a look at this load test in a bit more detail. So this is just going to create a huge amount of sales orders in our system. So in here we've set up that this load test is going to talk to 10 different agents. Each agent is going to run this same queue. So this is a Swiftest test queue. We'll have a quick look at that at the end of this. But these are the same tests that you will create and do your functional testing, which is pretty cool. You don't have to rewrite all those tests just because you're load testing. You take all those same tests and you can just create a number of different virtual users that will test that at scale. So each agent is going to run this test queue. It's going to spin up 10 virtual users on each one of those machines, and it's going to run that queue 3 times. So this test queue is actually going to create 2 purchase orders. So it's 10 agents times 10 users times 3 iterations times 2 purchase orders. It's going to create 600 purchase orders all at once. You can also set up these wait times. So you might want to set up a wait between actions, tests, iterations, or virtual users. This load test as it stands is just going to run as quickly as it can. And maybe that's what you want to test, or maybe you want to start entering some of these values to try and simulate a more realistic load. So, maybe you know that not all of your users are going to be able to enter a purchase order as quickly as possible. Some of them are still quite new to the system and are reading a training manual as they're doing it. This is just there so you can create a more realistic blend, or maybe for this test you just want to hit it as hard as you can and make sure that it can handle the maximum. So I'm not actually going to execute this. We've got a recording of the last time that this was run, and I'm just going to sort of step through it a little bit. So all you have to do is highlight, click execute. Then you could overwrite the name and description, and you might want to do that because maybe you are you want to run this a couple of times to get some baseline numbers, and then once you've got those baseline numbers, if there's an area you need to tweak, maybe you make a small change and then you run it again, and then you see how that affects the numbers, and then you make another small change and you run it again. Excuse me. As Pat said earlier, the real benefit of this is that every time you run it, it's going to be exactly the same. It's the same load again and again and again. So you can make these small little tweaks here and there, and see what effect they have on your system, if it's helping or not. You can also override at this point, how many VUs, iterations, or the wait times itself. We'll just leave those as they are. And then this test, load test, the controller is going to chat to all the agents and they're going to start kicking off this load. So we're seeing here, these are all the agents that there are. Each agent is running 10 virtual users. This is how far they've got in the process and far they have got in the iteration itself. The last iteration, how long that took, what number of tests that it's in, and just sort of a little status message. And down here, we just got a little crude measurement of the CPU of the web server that this is running on. So we'll skip ahead a little bit. You'll see once these tests start firing up and doing something, once these tests start running, there's going to be a big spike on the web server. Because that login action is quite an expensive one. You've got 100 users logging in all at once. That'll kind of stabilize as the tests start running, and you'll see that the web server is it's handling this load pretty easily. It's somewhere between 8 and 30% is where it's happy. So it's got no real issue running this, and all these tests are going to slowly finish their iterations and run through for the full 600 purchase orders. And we'll just sort of skip ahead. Now the CPU has gone back to 0. Nothing much is happening. And you're just sort of seeing that all of these tests are running successfully. They might fail, which would be sort of show you that maybe the load is too big and the pages aren't refreshing enough, or maybe it's highlighting some sort of bug on a web server or a switch or a database or something like that. But this entire test took 10 minutes to run, 10 minutes to create 600 purchase orders, and you can run that again and again and again as many times as you need to, just to check that any tweaks that you might make are sort of fixing an issue. Okay, so we'll head back to the controller now, and we'll have a look at some of the data that we can inquire on. So this was the recording of the test that we looked at earlier. This is a breakdown per agent. They all ran the same test queue. That you don't have to do it that way. Maybe you want to be testing a blend, creating purchase orders and sales orders at the same time as time entry and running some batch end month-end jobs. Just so happens that this is the way we set it up for this. This is quite cool. So because this is actually running Swiftest tests within a queue, those tests are built up, they're very granular. There's an action that says login to E1 with these profiles. The next action says launch this application from FastPass. Then the next action says click this button. So the cool thing is we keep track of all of those. So here for these 100 users creating 600 purchase orders, the average login was 10 seconds, the slowest login was 26 seconds. So maybe you run this for 100 users, get these baseline numbers, you're happy with them, but then you scale it up to 600 users or 1,000 users. And then you start seeing where things start slowing down. If opening an application is taking too long, have a look at what's happening behind it. If clicking an OK button or a find starts taking a while with too many users, have a look at the event rules, like maybe an index is missing on a table or something like that. It's really powerful having this sort of information at action level that you can then use with other information that you might get from other monitoring tools on your system. All this information is available to download as well. I've got just a little an example of maybe what you might want to do once you pull that data out of Excel. Create all sorts of charts and graphs. And I think it's quite powerful if you take other monitoring information and sort of transpile that all into a big spreadsheet. You can get quite a lot of information out of that. Cool, so just real quick, I'll take you to the Swiftest application for those of you that haven't seen that. So this is the application that we use to create the automated tests that then feed into LoadTest. So it looks very much like the LoadTest controller application. I'm not going to go into the how we actually create tests. Don't quite have enough time for that today. But here we've got a base catalog, and it's quite a nice way to sort of structure your test to create a base catalog. So maybe we've got one for LoadTest and Swiftest. Maybe we decide we want one for finance, another one for procurement, or maybe we just have one catalog. But this is basically a collection of all of your up-to-date tests that are successful, and you can run and prove that your system is working the way that you expect it to. And then maybe a testing event comes up, a load testing event comes up, and you can copy this whole catalog into it's almost like an execution project. And then assemble those tests or write new tests or, assemble them into test queues, which is what we looked at earlier with that queue that was running a purchase order. So here we've got another queue, which is made up of 5 different tests. These ones in the GL. So this first one is going to create a journal entry. It's going to save the batch number that it creates, and it's going to pass it to this test, which is going to change that batch status to pending. This test is going to then approve it. This test is going to post it, and this one is going to void it. So these are your same tests that you're doing, automated testing in Swiftest. You're just passing that information through to LoadTest and scaling up the number of users and testing at scale to make sure that, functionally the test works. Does it work when 500 users do it at the same time? Cool. And I'll pass you back to Pat now.
All right, good stuff, Shaun. Thanks for doing that. Quick tour of what LoadTest looks like. I'm going to go back and share my screen. Now, Shaun finished by talking about, if I can get into slideshow mode here again. Shaun finished, gone to the wrong place entirely. Please bear with me while I find myself. I want to be here, and I want to be in slideshow mode. Okay, Shaun finished by talking about these test queues. And the test queues are sort of the meat in the sandwich, that feeds, that results in load. And he mentioned that the tests are all very granular and they're assembled, to reflect end-to-end business processes. And then those end-to-end processes are brought together in a variety of ways, however you see fit, to simulate load. Swiftest is a prerequisite to being able to use LoadTest. Only one person within an organization really needs to, necessarily needs to get into Swiftest and learn how to write scripts. But obviously, our hope is that Swiftest excites, and delivers. And not only your load testing requirements will be, satisfied and addressed by you taking advantage of the DWS testing products, but all of your, unit functional, system integration type testing, would be done using Swiftest from a regression testing perspective. The testing that we do and the way we're writing scripts, as I said, is very different from what you see in most products because it's not technical. You do not need to be technical, and we've managed, quite cleverly to sort of separate the steps that are being executed in a test from the data that's being consumed by a test. So we've got this degree of separation between the job that's being done, the test that's being executed, and the data that's being consumed and even created by the test that you're running. And that's, extremely powerful, and it's very versatile. And, the underlying scripting capability, that sits behind Dimension LoadTest, gives you a tremendous amount of capability. One of the beta customers that we worked with last year was a company called Meyer Group. Meyer Group is an established JD Edwards customer. They were on World Software for a very long time and took the decision, during 2018, late 17, 18, to run a project to get off of World Software onto Enterprise One. And they did that by implementing 9.2 on, their own kit. So they had their own data center on premise, and load testing was obviously very important to them. And it was very classic, sort of typical scenario where, as they got towards the end of the project, they started to they started the process that, that saw them sort of double checking that, everything had been configured properly and that, the configuration, both on the infrastructure side as well as on the software side, would stand up and allow them to go live with confidence. And, it's a good quote from, a manager at Meyer Group, regarding their use and the value that they saw in using LoadTest. So LoadTest is all about taking the stress out of stress testing, in all of its guises. And it doesn't matter, as I say, where you are or what you're doing with Enterprise One. There are situations, and scenarios where you should be able to see value, in doing this kind of highly repeatable, consistent, repeatable sort of checks of your system's performance and your infrastructure's ability to handle the load that you're going to be throwing at JD Edwards. Our appeal to anyone committed to JD Edwards is to think about testing smarter. Whether you're a systems integrator providing services and support to end customers, or whether you're an end customer, there is value in thinking about the way you do your testing and contemplating improvements to the way you do your testing. You can save a lot of time and a lot of money. You can improve the quality of the project. And, you know, you can potentially get so good at running projects that when you go to the business and propose running a project, they're very receptive to the idea and keen for you to go ahead and help them to innovate and deliver and realize the value that's sort of locked away in Enterprise One. So with that, I'm going to suggest that we use the last 5 or 10 minutes. I think, what's the time? It's 35 minutes in, just about. Yeah, 36 minutes in. And I'll invite anybody who wants to submit a question or questions, you know, to do so. There is via the console, you know, the ability to key in and, you know, ask questions. And I can see a few questions coming through, so that's absolutely brilliant. So we'll use the time to, you know, to do that. So I've got a question from someone that says, you know, we drop thousands of orders simultaneously. Those orders have to be, you know, rated for freight before pick. You know, that's a custom process. Can this be automated? Yes, is the answer. You know, what we're able to do with our testing suite is anything, you know, that you as a user of JD Edwards can do whilst you're sitting in front of a JD Edwards terminal. So if you're taking an order, you know, doing advanced pricing, and coming up with, you know, with prices for quantities for particular customers in particular locations, you know, we can do the advanced pricing. And if you then go on to do some sort of, you know, freight process and, you know, add in charges associated with delivery, you'd be doing that presumably with JD Edwards, you know, capability or custom JD Edwards code. You know, that would all fit into the process and just be catered for by what we're doing. All of our solutions, as I've said before, are JD Edwards specific, and as a company, we like modifications. We accept, understand, and like the fact that you can personalize JD Edwards. You can go in and change the code, and you can copy and add objects if you want to. Anything that you develop and use, you know, that is written using the JD Edwards case tool, you know, can be tested using our products. Okay, so that's the answer to that question. I hope I've addressed that one. There's another question here yeah, this is a good one as well. It asks about the JD Edwards changes to JD Edwards Enterprise One, whether that be by Oracle or by, you know, the customer by way of personalization or by way of customization modification. What we're doing when we write a script, and Shaun, stop me if I get this wrong, but when we write a script and when we do load tests, we're always looking at a particular JD Edwards environment. You know, so we're going to be at an application release level, at a tools release level, and that script, you know, you will write that script, run that script, and prove that script. Prove to yourself that that script works in that environment, at that tools release, and at that application release level. Because of the nature of the way we do scripting and the way we look after scripts and allow you to maintain scripts, if you did a tools release upgrade or an applications release upgrade, or if you made a modification to an application, you know, that was part of a test, we could run that old test against the new code or a new environment. And that test might work or it might fail. If it works, great. You know, we just have to double check that, you know, it's doing what we thought it was doing and we're getting the results that we expected we wanted to get. But if it breaks, the tool, LoadTest and Swiftest, you know, and the interface is such that you can go in and just make tweaks and tunes to the tests that you're talking about so that it works in the updated environment. You don't have to throw anything away and start from scratch. And that's a real huge benefit. When we talk about what we're doing from a smarter testing perspective, I always talk to people about creating a catalog of test scripts, whether they're functional unit regression type tests or load tests. We're creating a catalog of scripts that reflects the way we have implemented and we use the software. And we all accept and understand that the way we've implemented and used the software might change over time. And the way our tests are held and maintained means that those scripts that you create and the tests that you create, the load test definitions you create, are sort of living and breathing and are there for you to pull forward, to update and use again over and over and over again. So the testing assets become really valuable and a powerful resource for you to improve the way you deliver each and every future JD Edwards project. So I hope I've answered that question. What do you think, Shaun? Did I do all right? Shaun's giving me a thumbs up. He thinks I answered that reasonably well. There's another question here. One last question here. I'm just having a half a look at the time. Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes. Somebody's asked about the commercial model. And we've tried to make this really, really accessible and easy. We understand that for a lot of customers, a load test is a one-off event. It's something they're going to do, in the last 4 to 6 weeks of a project. So what we've done with our commercial model is, for all of our products, the products are made available as a service, with a considerable part of what you see and feel and do, accessible via the web through the Dimension, what we call the Dimension Hub. And what you're paying for, what you pay for from a load test perspective is what we call virtual user days. So if you had, 500 named users, and at peak, you wanted to test 300 users concurrently, putting work through the system, you would be using on a test day, 300 virtual users. You would have 300 virtual user days to support, that requirement. And that number of user days, the virtual user days, is there for you to consume, in the context of a project. So, if you had 300 users and you wanted to do 4 days worth of load testing, you would need 1,200 virtual user days, to cover that testing requirement in the context of that project. If you were looking at doing quarterly performance checks, and you wanted to spend 1 day a quarter, doing testing up to a peak of 300 users on that day, then again, you would have 300 times 1 day each quarter, which would be that 1,200 user days, during a year. And that's kind of what the commercial model looks like. As a prerequisite, you do have to have one Swiftest user, and we sort of bundle that in and just talk about a load test price. But we aspire, as I suggested, to sell and to get customers thinking about not just doing load test, but doing load test and functional type regression testing with Swiftest. But we're very happy to just talk about and help companies meet their particular load testing requirements if that's what they're interested in. Okay. I think that's just about it. I don't see any other questions. That's a few that we've got through there. So at this point, looking at the clock as well, we've been very respectful of the 45 minutes that we said we were gonna consume. And I hope for those of you that joined, we've had a good audience and we've had a good few questions there. I hope you found the session informative, interesting, and of value. you'll receive information via GoToWebinar, as I'm sure, as follow-up, and, from the marketing team here at DWS, we'll make sure that if you've got any questions that haven't been answered, you know where to go to get answers. Would be delighted to, engage and talk about your particular needs. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Wish you the best for the balance of your day. Hope we have an opportunity to chat and talk about your particular needs at some point in the future. Whether that happens or not, we're glad you took time out of your day to understand where we're at, what we're doing, and how we're trying to help people within the JD Edwards community. Thank you, Shaun, and thank you, everyone.
All right.